You know, a lot of people think that learning English is about talent or about having some kind of special gift. They imagine that the people who speak fluently, the people who feel confident in conversations, must have been born with some kind of magic. But the truth is, most of the time, it's not talent. It's not luck. It's not even about being smart. It's about something much less glamorous, something a little less exciting, but far more powerful. It's discipline. Discipline is one of those words that sometimes feels heavy. Maybe it reminds you of strict teachers, or rules, or punishment. But that's not what I mean. I'm talking about the kind of discipline that is quiet, steady, reliable. The kind of discipline that makes you show up every day, even when you don't feel like it. The kind of discipline that says, yes, I'll study a little today, even if I'm tired. Or, I'll read that article. I'll listen to that podcast. I'll speak to that person, even if my brain says, not today. Let me tell you a story. A friend of mine, let's call him Omar, once told me he had been trying to learn English for over 10 years. 10 years. He had books stacked on his desk. He had downloaded apps. He had signed up for online classes. And every time, he started with so much energy. The first week, perfect, he studied 2 hours every day. The second week, still going strong, maybe 1.5 hours. But by the third week, things started to fade. Work got busy. Life got complicated. His motivation started to shrink. And before he knew it, his books were closed. The apps were deleted, and English once again became a dream, not a reality. This cycle repeated itself again and again. Motivation came, motivation went. Excitement came, excitement went. And then, one day I asked him a simple question. Omar, what if instead of waiting for motivation, you tried building discipline? At first, he didn't like the idea. He thought discipline sounded boring. But here's the truth: discipline is what keeps you moving when motivation runs out. And motivation always runs out. Every single person who has learned English fluently will tell you. They had days when they didn't feel like it. Days when they were tired, bored, or even frustrated. But discipline said, it doesn't matter how you feel, just take one step today. So Omar decided to try something new. Instead of forcing himself to study for 2 hours, he decided to commit to just 15 minutes a day. Just 15. No excuses, no skipping, no exceptions. At first it felt too small, but something interesting happened. He kept his promise. Day after day, he showed up. 15 minutes became 30. 30 became an hour. And after a few months, Omar realized something powerful. He had become the kind of person who studies every day, not because he felt motivated, but because it had become part of his life. This is the heart of discipline: small, consistent actions that add up over time. Think about it. If you spend just 15 minutes a day with English, that's nearly 2 hours a week. 8 hours a month. Almost 100 hours a year. And that's only 15 minutes a day. Now imagine if you slowly built up to 30 minutes, or even an hour. That's hundreds of hours of English practice without ever depending on motivation. And I want you to think about this in your own life. How many times have you started something with excitement, only to stop when life got busy? How many times have you said, I'll learn English this year, but then found yourself giving up after a few weeks? It's not because you're lazy. It's not because you're not capable. It's because motivation doesn't last. Discipline does. I remember another student, Maria, who used to tell me, "I just don't have time." And you know what? She really was busy. She had a full-time job, 2 kids, and a house to take care of. But one day, we looked closely at her routine. She spent about 30 minutes every evening scrolling through her phone, watching random videos, doing nothing really important. I asked her, "What if you took just half of that time and used it for English?" She hesitated, but she tried it. 30 minutes a night, and within 6 months, her English had transformed. Why? Not because she suddenly had more talent, but because she built discipline into her everyday life. Discipline doesn't mean you have to live like a robot. It doesn't mean you can't take a day off. What it means is that you build habits, systems, and routines that support your English learning even when your emotions don't. For example, maybe you always listen to an English podcast while cooking, or maybe you always read 2 pages of an English book before bed, or maybe you always write one short journal entry in English during your lunch break. These small routines become automatic, like brushing your teeth. You don't need motivation to brush your teeth. You just do it. Imagine if English became like that for you. Now, here's something important. Discipline is not about perfection. You don't need to study for hours every day. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to speak without mistakes. Discipline is about consistency. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's not perfect. Even when you feel like you're not making progress. Because here's the secret: you are making progress, even if you don't see it right away. Let's play with an image. Imagine a bamboo plant. In the first few years, you water it every day, but you don't see much. It barely grows above the ground. You might think nothing is happening, but under the soil, the roots are spreading, getting stronger, preparing. And then suddenly, after years of discipline, the bamboo shoots up, growing meters in just weeks. That's how English works. Your daily discipline may not show results right away, but one day, you'll find yourself in a conversation, speaking with confidence. And you'll realize your roots were growing all along. I want you to think for a moment about your own habits. Every one of us already has discipline in some part of our life, even if we don't realize it. You brush your teeth every morning. You take a shower. You go to work. You pay your bills. You cook food. You clean your house. These things are not always exciting, but you do them because they're part of your life. Imagine if English became part of your life in the same way, not something extra, not something optional, not something only do when you feel like it, but something natural, automatic, built into your routine. The secret to building discipline is to make English unavoidable, to weave it into your daily patterns. Let me share another story. There was a young man named Arjun who told me he always wanted to practice speaking but never had time. His work schedule was crazy, and by the time he got home, he was exhausted. So I asked him, "Tell me, do you drive to work?" He said yes, about 40 minutes each way. That's 80 minutes a day in the car. 80 minutes of music or silence or traffic noise. I told him, "Why don't you make your car your English classroom?" At first he laughed. He said, "But I'm alone in the car. Who will I talk to?" And I said, "Talk to yourself. Talk out loud. Narrate your thoughts. Repeat sentences you hear from podcasts. Argue with yourself in English. It sounded silly, but he tried it. Day after day, his commute became his classroom. He would listen to an English podcast, pause it, repeat phrases, argue with the speaker, ask questions out loud. Within months, his fluency exploded. Not because he magically had more time, but because he turned dead time into disciplined time. That's what I want you to notice. Discipline isn't just about studying harder, it's about studying smarter. It's about capturing the little moments, the small opportunities that most people waste, and turning them into progress. Think of your own day. Do you walk somewhere? Do you cook? Do you wash dishes? Do you wait in line? These are golden moments for English. If you build a habit of using them, you won't even feel like you're studying. You'll just be living with English. Now let's talk about something that often destroys discipline, the search for perfection. So many learners believe that every study session must be intense, or that every sentence they speak must be perfect, and when it's not, they feel discouraged, and slowly discipline breaks. Let me tell you about Sophia. She loved English, but she was a perfectionist. If she made one mistake, she felt ashamed. If she forgot a word, she felt like a failure. So she would spend hours preparing one sentence, one email, one short presentation. It exhausted her, and after a while, she stopped practicing because it felt too heavy, too painful. One day I asked her, "Sophia, when a baby learns to speak, do you criticize the baby for making mistakes?" She laughed and said, "Of course not. They're just learning." And I asked her, "Then why don't you treat yourself with the same kindness?" That question changed her perspective. She began to allow mistakes. She began to treat every mistake as proof of discipline, proof that she was practicing. And when she stopped chasing perfection, she found freedom. She spoke more, she practiced more, and she built real confidence. This is an important part of discipline, letting go of perfection. Discipline isn't about doing things perfectly, it's about showing up, even when it's messy. Think of an athlete training at the gym. They don't expect to lift the heaviest weight on the first day. They show up, they sweat, they struggle, and little by little, they get stronger. You have to see your English journey the same way. Here's another powerful tool: accountability. Discipline is much easier when someone else is watching. When you tell a friend, "I will practice English with you every Tuesday," you're more likely to do it. When you join a group, when you share your goals with others, when you commit to something publicly, you add an extra layer of responsibility. I remember a student named Luis who always struggled with self-study. He tried apps, books, even YouTube lessons, but he always gave up after a few weeks. One day, he joined a small study group. Every Sunday evening, they met online to practice conversation. Sometimes Louise didn't feel like joining, but because he didn't want to let the group down, he showed up. And week after week, that simple accountability kept him disciplined. So here's something you can try. Find one friend, just one, who also wants to improve their English. Make a simple agreement. Every week, you'll talk for 10 minutes in English. That's it. 10 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but the discipline of showing up every week, no matter what, can change your life. Now, I want to talk about something deeper: your identity. True discipline doesn't come from forcing yourself forever. It comes from becoming the kind of person who does the thing naturally. Think about someone who runs every morning. At first, they need motivation, they need alarms, they need coffee. But after a while, running becomes part of their identity. They don't say, I have to run. They say, I'm a runner. The same is true for English. If you see yourself as someone who is trying to learn, you'll always feel fragile, always at risk of giving up. But if you start to see yourself as an English speaker in progress, your discipline becomes part of who you are. You don't ask, should I practice today? You just practice, because that's what English speakers do. And you might be thinking, but I'm not fluent yet. How can I call myself an English speaker? Here's the truth: you are already an English speaker the moment you decide to live with English. Fluency is a journey, not a switch. You don't wait until you're perfect to call yourself an English speaker. Just like a runner doesn't wait until they've won a marathon to call themselves a runner. They run, therefore they are. You speak, you learn, you practice, therefore you are an English speaker. So let's think about this idea of identity a little more deeply. Imagine two people who want to learn English. The first person says, I'm trying to learn English, but it's really hard. The second person says, I'm an English speaker, and I'm still improving every day. Which one do you think will build more discipline? Which one will feel stronger on the days when they don't want to practice? Of course, the second person. Why? Because when you tie discipline to your identity, it stops being a choice and starts being who you are. Let me give you a small example. I had a student named Farah. She used to say, I'm terrible at English. That was the story she told herself for years. And because she believed it, she avoided speaking, she avoided reading, she avoided practicing. Her lack of discipline was not because she was lazy, it was because her identity was holding her back. One day, I asked her to try something new. I told her, from now on, I want you to say, I am an English speaker in training. Not I'm terrible, not I'm learning, but I am an English speaker in training. At first, it felt strange, but every day she repeated it, and slowly something changed. She started to act like an English speaker. She practiced more, she spoke more, and she didn't give up so easily. Her discipline grew, not from forcing herself, but from believing a new story about who she was. This is why your inner dialogue matters. The way you talk to yourself is one of the most powerful tools for discipline. If you constantly say, I can't, it's too hard, I'll never be fluent, then your discipline will collapse. But if you say, I'm the kind of person who practices English every day, no matter what, then you're building an identity that supports your discipline. Now, let's be real. Even with identity, even with accountability, there will still be days when you don't feel like it. Days when you're tired, distracted, maybe even discouraged. And this is where another secret of discipline comes in: lowering the barrier. What do I mean? I'll tell you a story about a man named Daniel. He wanted to read English books, but every time he picked one up, he felt overwhelmed. The books were too long, too difficult, and his discipline would break after just a few days. So I told him, don't try to read a whole book. Don't even try to read a chapter. Just read 1 page. 1 page a day. That's all. At first, he thought it was too small. But he did it. 1 page every night before bed. And you know what happened. Some nights he only read 1 page, but most nights once he started he read more. Within a few months, he had finished his first English book, then his second, then his third. The discipline came not from forcing himself to read for hours, but from lowering the barrier so much that he had no excuse not to start. This is a powerful principle for you, too. If speaking for an hour feels impossible, speak for 5 minutes. If writing an essay feels heavy, write 3 sentences. If listening to a podcast feels too long, listen for 2 minutes. The secret is start small, but start consistently. Because once you start, momentum carries you further. And this brings me to something many learners don't realize. Discipline is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. If you've never practiced discipline with English before, don't expect to suddenly study for 3 hours a day. That's like trying to lift a heavy weight without training first. You'll hurt yourself and give up. Instead, start with a lightweight 5 minutes, 10 minutes, one simple routine. Build the muscle slowly. Over time, your discipline muscle will grow stronger and bigger challenges will feel easier. Let me share another personal memory. When I first started learning a new language myself, I made the same mistake many of my students make. I set huge goals. I told myself I would study 2 hours every day, and for a few days I did. But then life got busy. I missed one day, then another, and soon I had given up. It was only when I stopped chasing big bursts of motivation and started focusing on small, consistent actions that I finally saw progress. 5 minutes became 10, 10 became 20, and eventually, daily practice became a natural part of my life. Now, let's think about the environment you're in. Discipline is not just about willpower, it's also about design. If your environment makes English practice difficult, you'll give up. But if your environment makes English easy, discipline becomes automatic. For example, if you want to read more in English, put an English book on your pillow so you see it before bed. If you want to listen more, download podcasts so they're already on your phone. If you want to speak more, put a sticky note on your mirror that says, "Talk to yourself in English for 2 minutes." These little environmental cues make discipline easier because they remind you without effort. Think of it like this. Don't fight against your environment, shape it to support your discipline. Surround yourself with English so it becomes the natural choice, not the hard choice. And here's another thought. Many people confuse discipline with punishment. They think discipline means suffering, pushing yourself against your will. But real discipline is about freedom. Think of it, if you build discipline in English, you free yourself from fear in conversations. You free yourself from embarrassment when you travel. You free yourself from missed opportunities at work. Discipline is the bridge between where you are now and the freedom you want in the future. Now, let's imagine a scene together. Imagine yourself 1 year from now. You wake up, and English is just part of your life. You don't fight with yourself about studying, it's automatic. You open your phone. You see English everywhere. You chat with a friend. You listen to a podcast. You read a short article. None of it feels forced, because discipline has built habits, and habits have built a lifestyle. That future version of you is confident, calm, and fluent not because of motivation, but because of the quiet power of discipline. Now, I want to touch on something that a lot of people struggle with when it comes to discipline: boredom. Yes, boredom. Because let's be honest, discipline isn't always exciting. Sometimes it's repetitive. Sometimes it feels slow. And when boredom shows up, many learners run away. They say, "This is too boring. I can't do it." And they quit. But here's the secret: boredom is not your enemy. Boredom is actually a sign that your brain is building strength. Think about exercise. If you go to the gym, some of the movements are repetitive. Push, pull, lift, repeat. It's not always exciting, but those repetitive movements build muscle. English discipline works the same way. Reading, listening, speaking, writing, sometimes they feel repetitive. But that repetition is exactly what creates fluency. I had a student named Karim who once told me, "I feel like I'm reading the same kinds of articles again and again. I'm getting bored." And I asked him, "When you play a sport, don't you practice the same moves again and again? Don't athletes repeat drills every day?" He thought about it and smiled. Because, of course, athletes don't stop just because practice is repetitive. They know that repetition builds mastery. The same is true for English. Discipline means learning to stay with the process, even when it feels a little boring, because you understand that boredom is part of growth. In fact, I'd even say this: when you feel bored, it might mean you're right on the edge of building deeper discipline. But there's another side to this too. While discipline means accepting some repetition, it doesn't mean you can't make English fun. In fact, one of the smartest ways to keep discipline alive is to add variety. Discipline doesn't mean doing the exact same thing forever. It means staying consistent in your practice, but allowing the methods to change so your mind stays curious. For example, one week you might read short stories. The next week, you might watch a series in English. The week after that, you might focus on journaling. The discipline is not in the activity, it's in the commitment. The commitment that says, "I will do something with English every day." Let me tell you about May, a learner from China. She started with a strict plan every night, 30 minutes of grammar exercises. She kept it up for a few months, but eventually she got bored and stopped. Then she decided to shift her approach. She made a list of activities she enjoyed: watching cooking videos in English, reading travel blogs, listening to music. She rotated them daily so she never felt stuck. And suddenly, her discipline became much easier to maintain. Why? Because she had found ways to make discipline enjoyable. So here's a golden rule. Discipline doesn't mean doing the same boring task forever. Discipline means showing up consistently while giving yourself freedom to enjoy the process. Now, let's talk about the role of rewards. Our brains are wired to chase rewards. When we feel good after doing something, we want to do it again. So one way to strengthen discipline is to create small rewards after each practice. It doesn't have to be big. Maybe after finishing a short English lesson, you treat yourself to a cup of tea. Maybe after completing a week of consistent practice, you allow yourself to watch your favorite show guilt-free. These small rewards signal to your brain, "Yes, this is worth doing." One student of mine, Raj, loved chocolate. So he made a deal with himself. After every English session, he could have one small piece. It sounds funny, but it worked, because his brain started to connect English practice with pleasure, and slowly the discipline became easier. Now, I'm not saying you need chocolate, though it's not a bad idea, but find what works for you. Maybe your reward is as simple as checking off a box on a calendar. Believe me, seeing a long chain of days where you kept your promise is one of the most satisfying rewards of all. This is sometimes called the "don't break the chain" method. Each day you practice English, you mark it on your calendar. After a while, you'll have a beautiful line of X, and when you see it, you won't want to break the chain. That visual reward keeps discipline alive. Here's something else to consider: setbacks. No matter how disciplined you are, there will be days you miss. Maybe you're sick, maybe work takes over, maybe life just gets messy. And this is where many learners fail. They miss one day, then feel guilty, then miss another day, and before they know it, they've stopped completely. But real discipline is not about never failing. It's about getting back on track quickly. If you miss one day, don't let it turn into two. If you miss two, don't let it turn into three. Forgive yourself, reset, and start again. Think of it like brushing your teeth. If you forget one night, you don't say, "Well, I guess I'll never brush again." You just brush the next morning. English should be the same. I remember a student named Ahmed who used to feel crushed whenever he missed a day. He told me, "I feel like I ruined everything." But I told him, one missed day doesn't erase your discipline. What matters is what you do next. That mindset freed him. He learned to bounce back quickly, and as a result, his long-term discipline became unshakable. And now, let me share something a little deeper. Discipline is not just about what you do, it's about who you become in the process. When you build discipline with English, you're not just learning a language. You're training your mind. You're proving to yourself that you can keep promises. You're building self-respect. And that self-respect spills into every area of your life. I once had a learner, Elena, who started practicing English for just 15 minutes a day. After 6 months, not only had her English improved, but she told me something surprising. She said, "I've started eating healthier and exercising more." I asked her why, and she said, "Because now I believe I can stick to things. I trust myself." That's the hidden gift of discipline. It teaches you that you can rely on yourself, that you are capable of growth, that you don't need to wait for perfect conditions. You can take action here and now. So much of discipline comes down to trust. Trusting that your small steps matter. Trusting that the effort you put in today, even if it feels tiny, will create something bigger tomorrow. And trusting that you don't need to be perfect to make progress. You just need to keep showing up. Think about water dripping on a stone. 1 drop does nothing. 10 drops do nothing. But after weeks, months, years, the stone changes. Not because of force, but because of consistency. That's discipline. Every word you read, every sentence you speak, every moment you listen, these are your drops of water. And even if you don't notice it today, over time, you will see the shape of your English changing. And here's something I want you to remember. Discipline doesn't always feel dramatic. It often feels quiet. There are no fireworks when you study 10 minutes a day. There's no audience clapping when you listen to an English podcast while cooking dinner. But months later, when you find yourself in a conversation you never thought you could have, when you read a book you once thought was too difficult, when you travel to a new place and suddenly understand what people are saying, that's when the quiet power of discipline reveals itself. One of my favorite stories is about a woman named Aisha. She was shy, very shy, and for years she told herself she would never be confident in English. But she made one small decision every day. She would speak to herself in English for just 2 minutes. No audience, no pressure, just her and her voice. At first, she felt silly, but she kept going. 2 minutes became 5, 5 became 10. After a year, she had built not only fluency, but also courage. And when she finally spoke in public, people were amazed at her confidence. They asked, "What's your secret?" And she smiled, because the secret wasn't magic, it was discipline. And that's what I want you to take away. Discipline isn't glamorous. It's not loud. But it's powerful. It turns dreams into reality. It turns someday into today. It gives you the freedom to live the life you want, to connect with people across the world, to open doors that were once closed. So here's the truth. You don't need the perfect plan. You don't need endless motivation. You don't need to wait for the right moment. You just need to begin. Small, steady, daily steps. Build the habit. Protect it. Forgive yourself when you slip. And then get back up again. Because in the end, discipline is not about punishment. It's about love. Love for your future self. Love for the opportunities waiting for you. Love for the person you're becoming. Every time you practice English with discipline, you're saying to yourself, I believe in you. I believe in who you can be. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll wake up and see that you've become exactly the kind of English speaker you once dreamed of. Not because of luck, not because of talent, but because of the quiet, steady, unstoppable force of discipline.